My father left me nothing, saying I was successful enough. His lawyer gave me a vault code. What I found inside changed everything I thought I knew about my father, our relationship, and the real reason he'd been so distant for the past 30 years of my life. I'm David Thornton, 42 years old, and I learned about my father's death through a phone call from his attorney. We hadn't spoken in 3 years. Before that, our relationship had been cordial but distant for most of my adult life. He'd missed my wedding, the birth of my daughter, and countless milestones, always with work excuses or scheduling conflicts. My father, Richard Thornton, had built Thornton Financial Group from nothing into a wealth management firm overseeing $800 million in assets. He was brilliant with money, ruthless in business, and emotionally unavailable in every personal relationship he'd ever had. The will reading was scheduled for a cold Tuesday morning in March 2024 at the offices of Whitmore and Associates. I drove 3 hours to attend, expecting very little. My younger sister Emma, who maintained a slightly warmer relationship with Dad, met me in the parking lot. "How are you holding up?" she asked, though we both knew the answer was complicated. "I'm fine. Just want to get through this." The conference room was elegant and intimidating, with dark wood paneling and leather chairs. Robert Whitmore, Dad's attorney for 20 years, sat at the head of the table with a thick folder in front of him. "Thank you both for coming," Robert began formally. "Richard's will is straightforward in most respects, but there are some unusual elements I need to explain." He opened the folder and began reading. Dad's estate was valued at approximately $47 million. The house, his art collection, and investment accounts were divided between various charities, his alma mater, and surprisingly, his longtime secretary Margaret, who received $2 million. Emma received $8 million outright, plus the vacation home in Vermont she'd always loved. Then Robert looked directly at me. "To my son David, I leave nothing from my estate. David has built a successful life and career without my help, demonstrating the independence and capability that will serve him better than inherited wealth." The words hit like a physical blow. Emma gasped beside me. "Nothing. After a lifetime of being emotionally distant, my father had made it official. I wasn't worth leaving anything to." "However," Robert continued, and something in his tone made me look up, "Richard left specific instructions for David to be delivered privately." He slid a sealed envelope across the table. My name was written on it in Dad's precise handwriting. "Richard requested you read this alone after the formal reading concludes." The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. Emma kept glancing at me with concern, but I couldn't process what I was feeling. Anger? Hurt? Relief that the pretense of our relationship was finally over? After Emma left, promising to call me later, Robert closed the conference room door and sat back down across from me. "Before you open that letter, I need to explain something," he said carefully. "I've been your father's attorney for 2 decades, but 3 years ago, he retained me for a very specific project. I signed an NDA and couldn't discuss it with anyone, including you, until after his death." My hands were shaking as I opened the envelope. Inside was a single page in Dad's handwriting. "David, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and Robert has already read my will in front of you and your sister. I imagine you're hurt, angry, and possibly relieved to finally have confirmation of what you've always suspected, that I never cared about you the way a father should. You're wrong about that, but I'll get to that later. First, I need you to go to Safety Deposit Box 847 at First National Bank downtown. Robert has the key. Inside that box, you'll find a combination to something important. The combination will make sense when you see it. I know this is cryptic. I know you probably want to throw this letter away and never think about me again. But I'm asking you, as your father, to follow these instructions. What you discover will explain everything. With more love than I ever showed you, Dad." I looked at Robert, who was holding a small key. "The safety deposit box is ready for you to access whenever you want. I'm authorized to accompany you." "What's in it?" "I genuinely don't know. Richard wouldn't tell me. He just said it was essential you follow his instructions exactly." The drive to First National Bank was surreal. Robert followed in his own car, giving me space to process. The bank manager, clearly briefed in advance, led us to the vault without questions. Box 847 was one of the larger ones. Robert used his key, and the manager used hers, and the door swung open to reveal a single envelope. Inside was another letter and a piece of paper with numbers, 19-41-73. "David, these numbers are the combination to a vault in my home office. You remember the office, the room I never let you or Emma enter as children. The vault is behind the portrait of my father above the fireplace. Before you open it, I want you to understand why I kept you at a distance for so many years. It wasn't because I didn't love you. It was because I loved you more than I loved myself, and I was terrified of ruining you the way my father ruined me. The vault contains 30 years of work. It's my real legacy, not the money or the company. And it's yours because you're the only person who can understand what it means. Go to the house. Open the vault. Everything will make sense. Dad. I drove to my father's house for the first time in 5 years. It was exactly as I remembered, immaculate, cold, and full of expensive things that felt like museum pieces rather than possessions someone actually loved. The office was locked, but Robert had keys for everything. Inside, it was unchanged. The massive desk where Dad had worked late into every night of my childhood. The leather chair worn smooth by decades of use. The portrait of my grandfather, stern and disapproving, hanging above the fireplace. I moved the portrait aside, revealing a wall safe I'd never known existed. My hands trembled as I entered the combination, 19-41-73. The dates I was born, January 9th, 1941, 7:30 p.m. The vault swung open, and inside were dozens of leather-bound journals, organized by year. I pulled out the first one, dated 1982, the year I was born. The first entry was dated January 10th, the day after I was born. Held David for the first time today. He's perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, Eleanor's eyes. I made a vow to him that I will not be the father mine was to me. I will not teach him that love is conditional, that success is everything, that emotions are weakness. I will break the cycle, even if it kills me. I sat heavily in Dad's chair and started reading. The journals were a detailed account of my entire life, but written from a perspective I'd never imagined existed. Entries about my first day of kindergarten. David cried when Eleanor dropped him off. I watched from the car, wanting to comfort him, but knowing I need to let him be brave. My father would have called him weak. I see strength in his vulnerability. About my high school graduation, David gave a speech today about following your passion rather than chasing money. I was so proud I couldn't breathe. He's everything I wanted to be at his age, but was too afraid to attempt. He'll never know I was there, standing in the back of the auditorium, because my presence would have made him nervous. About the fight we had when I announced I was becoming a teacher instead of joining his firm, David told me today he's choosing teaching over finance. I pretended to be disappointed, told him he was wasting his potential. It was a lie. I've never been more proud of anyone in my life. He's choosing meaning over money, exactly what I wished I'd been brave enough to do. But I can't tell him that. If I support him, he might change his mind to please me. He needs to own this decision completely. I read for hours, tears streaming down my face, as 30 years of my life unfolded through my father's eyes. He'd been at every school play, sitting in the back row. At my college graduation, watching from a distance. At my wedding, where I'd assumed he chose not to come, but he'd actually been there, sitting in his car outside the venue, too emotional to come inside. Watch David marry Jennifer today, through the church window. She's perfect for him. He looked happier than I've ever seen him. I stayed outside because I couldn't risk my presence dampening his joy. He thinks I don't care. The truth is I care so much it paralyzes me. There were entries about therapy he'd started in his 50s, trying to understand why he couldn't express love the way normal fathers did. About his own father's emotional abuse, the impossible standards, the constant criticism that had convinced him he was fundamentally broken. Dr. Martinez says I'm self-sabotaging my relationship with David to protect him from me. She says by staying distant, I'm actually recreating my father's emotional absence. She's right, but I don't know how to fix it. What if I try to get close and I hurt him? What if my damage is contagious? The later journals showed Dad's increasing awareness that his strategy wasn't working, that distance was still abandonment regardless of the motivation. But by then, the pattern was set, and he didn't know how to bridge the gap he'd created. David's daughter was born today. Grace. I'm a grandfather, and I'll probably never meet her. David doesn't trust me enough to include me in important moments, and he's right not to. I've given him no reason to believe I care. But I do. God, I do. The final journal, from this past year, was different. Dad knew he was dying. He'd been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and given 6 months. He'd chosen not to tell anyone, not to burden us with his illness. I have maybe 3 months left. I've spent my whole life protecting David from me, and now I'll die having never told him the truth, that he was the best thing I ever created, that watching him become a good man despite my failures has been my greatest joy, that every day I stayed away from him was the hardest decision I ever made. I'm leaving him nothing in my will because he doesn't need my money. He's built a good life, a meaningful life, teaching kids, and loving his family. He's everything I should have been. But I can't die without him knowing the truth. This vault is my confession. 30 years of love I was too broken to express properly. Maybe after I'm gone, reading these journals, he'll understand that my distance was never about him. It was always about me, my damage, my fear of contaminating him with my emotional inability. I hope he can forgive me. But more than that, I hope he knows he was loved. Every single day. From a distance, inadequately, but loved nonetheless. The last entry was dated 3 weeks before Dad died. I'm very tired now. The pain is considerable, but I'm ready. My life's work isn't the company or the money. It's David. He's proof that the cycle can be broken, that damage doesn't have to pass down through generations. Son, if you're reading this, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't the father you deserved. I'm sorry I let fear keep me from showing you what you meant to me. But please know that every sacrifice you thought I missed, I was there. Every achievement you thought I didn't care about, I celebrated privately. Every moment you needed a father, I wanted desperately to be one for you. You are my greatest success. Not because of your accomplishments, but because of your character. You're kind where I was cold. You're present where I was absent. You're the father I should have been. The money I left Emma is for her security. But you don't need financial security. You have something more valuable. You have the ability to love openly, to be vulnerable, to connect with people. That's a gift I never had, and it's worth more than any inheritance I could leave you. Use these journals however you want. Burn them if reading them is too painful. Share them if you think they'll help someone else understand absent fathers. Or keep them private as a record of one broken man's desperate love for his son. I love you, David. I always have. I just didn't know how to show it. I sat in my father's office until dark, reading and rereading passages, crying in a way I hadn't cried since childhood. My phone buzzed with texts from Emma and my wife Jennifer, but I couldn't respond yet. Everything I'd believed about my father was wrong. He hadn't been cold and indifferent. He'd been terrified and damaged and desperately trying not to hurt me with his own brokenness. It was the wrong strategy, executed from a place of love rather than neglect. The next day, I met with Robert again. Did you know what was in the vault? No. But 3 years ago, Richard spent 6 months organizing everything. He wanted to ensure you'd find it after he was gone and understand his intentions. He could have just told me. We could have talked. I suggested that, Robert said carefully. Many times. But Richard was convinced that while he was alive, his presence would damage any relationship you tried to build. He thought his apology would be more believable after he was gone, when he couldn't benefit from your forgiveness. I spent the next month reading and rereading Dad's journals. I shared selected passages with Jennifer and Emma, trying to help them understand the man we'd thought we knew. Emma was angry at first. He could have gotten help. He could have tried. Instead, he just gave up on having a relationship with us. He did get help. I showed her the therapy entries. For years. But some damage runs deep. He truly believed that staying away was protecting us. Jennifer, ever empathetic, cried while reading Dad's account of our wedding day. He loved you so much, David. In a broken way, but he loved you. The hardest part was reconciling two truths, that my father had loved me deeply, and that his love had still resulted in pain and abandonment. Both things could be true simultaneously. His intentions didn't erase the hurt, but understanding them changed the meaning of that hurt. I decided to write my own journal entry, a letter to the father I'd never fully known. Dad, I found the vault. I read everything. And I understand now what you were trying to do, even though I wish you'd done it differently. You were right that you weren't a good father in the traditional sense. I needed you at my school plays, my graduation, my wedding. I needed you to meet your granddaughter, to be present for ordinary moments, to show me that I mattered to you. But you were also trying to break a cycle of abuse, and that's noble even if your execution was flawed. You chose absence over the emotional cruelty your father showed you. That wasn't the only option, but I understand why it felt like it was. I forgive you. Not because what you did was okay, but because I can see now that you were doing your best with the tools you had. You loved me the only way you knew how, and that love was real even if it was inadequate. I wish we could have had this conversation while you were alive. I wish you'd trusted me enough to risk being close. But I'm grateful for these journals, for this window into your heart that you were too afraid to show me in person. You were wrong about one thing. Your presence wouldn't have ruined me. I was strong enough to love an imperfect father. But you didn't trust that, and I suppose that's the real tragedy of your childhood trauma. It convinced you that you were poison when you were just human. Thank you for the inheritance you actually left me. Not money, but truth. Understanding. A record of love that existed even when I couldn't see it. Your son, David. I kept the journals, storing them in my own safe at home. Sometimes I read them when I need to remember that people are more complicated than they appear, that coldness can mask fear, that absence doesn't always mean indifference. I use Dad's story when I teach my high school English classes about complex characters and the difference between actions and motivations. I tell them, without revealing it's personal, about a man who loved someone so much he stayed away to protect them, and how that strategy was both selfless and selfish, loving and harmful. I also started therapy myself, working through the complicated feelings Dad's journals triggered. Grief for the relationship we could have had. Anger at his choice to stay distant. Gratitude for his honesty after death. Sadness for the pain he carried his whole life. My therapist helped me see that Dad's inheritance was actually more valuable than money. He gave me understanding, closure, and a model for how not to parent. He showed me that loving someone includes being present with them, even when you're scared, even when you feel broken. I'm determined to be different with my daughter Grace. She knows I'm not perfect, that I make mistakes, that I sometimes struggle with expressing emotion. But she also knows I show up. I'm at every recital, every parent-teacher conference, every ordinary Tuesday evening dinner. I'm present not because it's easy, but because I understand now what absence costs. Emma and I grew closer after Dad's death, bonding over the complicated legacy he left us. She admitted that the money he left her felt hollow compared to the journals he left me. He knew you better, she said once. The journals prove that. He knew you'd value the truth over the money. Or he knew I could afford to value truth because I have a stable income. I joked, but she shook her head. No, he knew your character. He knew what mattered to you. That's a kind of love too. The most unexpected gift from Dad's journals was what they taught me about forgiveness. Not the clean, simple forgiveness where everything is okay, but the messy, complicated kind where you acknowledge harm while also acknowledging humanity. Dad hurt me through his absence. That's true. But he also loved me in the only way his damaged heart knew how. Both things are true. Both things matter. 3 years after his death, I'm still processing the journals, still finding new layers of meaning in his words. But I've reached a place of peace with our relationship, or at least acceptance of its fundamental incompleteness. My father was brilliant and broken, loving and afraid, well-intentioned and deeply flawed. He made terrible choices from a place of love, which doesn't make the choices okay, but makes them understandable. The real inheritance he left me wasn't wealth or property. It was honesty, a record of hidden love, proof that I was seen and valued even when I couldn't feel it. That's worth more than any amount of money, even if it took 30 years and his death for me to receive it. Thanks for following this complicated story about fathers and sons, distance and love, and the inheritances that actually matter. Sometimes the most valuable things we leave behind aren't material at all. Until we meet again, folks. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your thoughts.